So if we go to our next question where we talk about the way the Uyghur Muslims have been discriminated, and there is a lot of other topics we could have talked about when it comes to human rights violations. We could have talked about the Saudis in Yemen. We could have talked about the Palestinians in Palestine or occupied areas of Palestine by Israel. We could have talked about kids in cages by America. There are so many things. Sort of the failure of kind of what's happened in Syria right now and Libya. With the way people have been treated in those countries, there are so many incidents we could talk about. But I feel like the talking about the Uyghur Muslims is so important because there's a lot of people who are reluctant to talk about the Uyghur Muslims because China will essentially erase you for talking about these things, whether that's online where they can censor your name. They did that with I don't know if you've heard of this story, but there's a footballer Mesut Ozil where he talked about what's going on with the Uyghur Muslims, and they erased him from all their the Chinese censored internet. They took him out, and it's just sad state of affairs really. And so talking about the way that the Uyghur Muslims have been discriminated against, I think is such a important topic, purely because this is something that people seem reluctant to talk about. How much do you kind of agree with that, Clara, or disagree?
Yes, I definitely do agree, and it unfortunately reminds me uh, the 40s and 1930s
Yeah,
when people were reluctant to talk about what's going on with the Jews in Germany and Eastern Europe. So it's very unpleasant, and I hope it will change very soon. And yeah, this issue should definitely be addressed, but politics is a
messy
tough
at
game.
best. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not something you want to be involved in. So if we just run through the articles, the ones that we've both looked at. You've got things like child separation from families. You've got a teacher talking about the forced sterilization within Xinjiang. You've got the goal of sort of the Chinese embassy in the US saying that a study shows that in the process of eradicating extremism in the minds of Uyghur women in Xinjiang, women were emancipated and gender equality and reproductive health were promoted, making them no longer baby making machines. They are more confident and independent. The goal of the Chinese embassy using essentially feminism to kind of push their agenda of forced sterilization, family separation, and slavery is just absolutely barbaric. And why Twitter haven't done more to deal with the Chinese embassy account is embarrassing, to be honest.
Mm.
If we just, sorry, if you just let me run through a few more of these, and then we'll talk about it a bit more. China forcing
Mm-hmm.
birth control on Uyghurs to suppress population. We've got here China uses tourism to smother Xinjiang's culture, where this article they talk about how China essentially turned Muslim holy sites or sort of to mosques and things like that within certain regions to sort of get rid of them. Essentially, people stop going there as much. It's a very interesting article to read from The Economist. This also talks about the kind of erasure of Muslim history within China as well. We've got Huawei, having a patent in order to some sort of AI technology so they could identify Uyghur Muslims by characteristics. Very very Nazi Germany. Kind of when they talk about Jews having big noses and other kind of facial features. This looks like something Huawei are participating in when it comes to Uyghur Muslims. We've got you know
deadly fear attack.
oh don't worry about that. You've got Xinjiang, which is something we're going to be talking about a lot more when it comes to cotton, suggesting that more than 500,000 people are being forced to pick cotton in Xinjiang. We've got MNS, talking about a call to action over the forced labour over cotton. We've got the Daily Mail. I'm not going to blame the Daily Mail for this, but they gave the NHS masks linked to Chinese Uyghur factories, which is I'm not going to blame the Daily Mail for this, but to say that this is how susceptible businesses are when they do business with China when it comes to manufactured goods. Also talking, talk about the amount of kind of concentration camps there are. Phenomenal work from BuzzFeed. We've got Apple's long-time supplier being accused of using forced labor in China. We've got here, this is something we'll talk about actually in a few minutes. Sort of the deal that they made with the EU when we talk about the international community, but kind of seeing all these things, Clara, sort of forced family separation, I can't even speak now. Separation, sterilization of women within, Xinjiang and certain other areas. We've got forced labor, erasure of history. What kind of, how do you, what? I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this now. What do you think about all of this stuff happening within China?
It is. Um,
If you
I
do you want to
think
talk
for
about it one by
me,
one? Sorry, do you want to
for
go
me,
through this
it
one by one?
is. Yeah, we will definitely go through it one by one.
So, if we talk about the family separation and the forced sterilization of women, what do you think about that?
It is. It is horrible, and for me, unbelievable that something like this is actually happening in the 21st century. Like I wouldn't expect anything this barbaric to be going on in such a developed society. I'm beyond words, and I feel with the victims and with the Uyghur population. It's horrible, and I would like to see some action uh, on the part of the international community to be taken with regards to Uyghur repressions.
And so, oh, sorry.
I think that especially when it comes to child separation and institutionalization of the children by the Chinese government, it looks like they are denying children their basic rights and cultural heritage as well, because they are taught in Chinese. They are forced to sing and dance to propagandistic songs, and it's basic manipulation of the children's minds, and it is. I think this is the worst sort of attack on the Uyghur culture they could have made. They're trying to erase any sort of Uyghur thinking and legacy, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Stopping them from carrying on having children and things like that, and erasing their history is a surefire method of erasing ethnic cleansing a group of people, essentially, locking them away in concentration camps and things like that, and forced labor camps. This is something we'll be talking about in a few minutes, but kind of the wider sanctions on China over the cotton being picked there. But according to this article, the Guardian one, the Xinjiang region produces more than 20% of the world's cotton, being produced essentially by slave labor. It's just madness. That it's that this sort of thing is happening on a global scale, and how despite anyone's best efforts, it's very hard to kind of be an ethical consumer within the world we live in, because the clothes that you could be wearing could be in part made by slave labor. Most likely it was made in a sweatshop, but also at the same time the cotton itself being picked by slaves, it hits differently.
I agree.
And Apple products being made there, and other products, so many other products and things being made within China. There's no guarantee that it wasn't made by slaves, and that's the kind of heart-wrenching thing, that why haven't companies done more to move manufacturing outside of China? It's just unreal when you know what's going on over there.
I agree. I think it is irresponsible on the company's part to not examine their supply chains properly. I think this is something that should be prevented. Or,
I mean, you've got a company here in Apple. I think it's $1 trillion company, right? Making their screens within from essentially from slave labor. Your company is worth so much money. You do not need to do this. You can afford to pay people properly, and this is the decision that you guys have made. and you haven't done anything about this.
This is capitalism, my friend.
Yeah, you'd have to tell me. This is the kind of the worst end of capitalism as well. Um, but yeah, that's the kind of reality of the world we live in. If you look at the BuzzFeed article, there's so many camps within northern areas of China and central China. It's just unreal, and people actively deny this. People are like, this isn't happening. China like, well, no, we treat these people well. There's no such thing. We don't have slave labor. It's like, no, you do, pal. You do. It's just unreal the amount of information control and what they've done to people, and the UN can't really do anything about this, as we mentioned before, because of the ability to veto any kind of sanctions against China. And any time any country kind of talks about what China are doing, China can actively cut business ties with them, and the US criticizes China, and China are like, well, look at your country. You had an insurrection recently. You've had protests over the way black people are treated by police in your country. I think you should sit outside. And it does kind of show you that countries really do need to keep a clean house here, because that's all countries like China will do. They'll just criticize you, despite the fact that China is one of the worst human rights offenders in the world right now. Probably joined up there with the Saudis, to be honest. What do you kind of think about that before we move on to the next kind of question?
I definitely agree with that, and well, we all know that China is basically a police state, but what they have been doing to Uyghurs, it's completely disproportionate how they've been treated by the government.
I mean, this is sorry, Clara. This is kind of erasing. This is ethnic cleansing at a very high level here. Getting these people into labor camps, stopping them from having children, erasing their history. What we are witnessing here is something short of the Nazis' final solution, where they gas people, but this is that on a much slower scale, and it's very scary to think how far the Chinese government have gone to deal with an ethnic minority within their country.
What you're saying is completely right. I would just like to point out that one has to take into account that China has a very sort of strange idea of meddling into what they call internal affairs. Yeah,
that's what they call it. Yeah, they're like, this is our country.
Yes.
Let us deal with things as we see fit, and it's just, if we follow that policy worldwide, it's gonna just create massive problems. And there is a time where you should be sanctioning other countries, and I think the time is now. The time has to actually deal with sanctions on China. I don't know if there's any more you want to talk about when it comes to kind of businesses and China, and kind of the discrimination that the Uyghur people faced, before we talk about the international community.
Mentioned the main ones already.
All right, do you think it's time to move on and talk about the international community then?
Yes.